Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf and Vav. This month's learning is sponsored by Renee Michelle. A man who dwells with no wife lives without joy, without blessing, and without goodness. When I wonder then what the Talmud, Torah, our traditions would be without women, I look forward to seeing our tradition enriched by efforts like Hadran's, which add more and more perspectives to what we live and breathe. With that, we will get started. So today's daf, we have a special presentation on Canva, which you can find also the PDF version or the Canva version on our website. It's a bit of a complicated daf, as was yesterday's. We're going to start off, we're going to finish up yesterday's topic, and then we're going to do something very similar to with a different question. And for that, I made a presentation. So let's finish up from last time. We started with this question. Just like Aim Imaz Asua, remember we had that braita with the three different sections, and now we're dealing with different parts of it. So now we say, if the grandmother-in-law is forbidden, then shouldn't his own grandmother be forbidden? And Abaye said, well, no, because Im Chahi, which meant only your mother. And then Rava said, and Rava got into a very long, complicated answer, which is going to be the exact same structure we're going to do with the second question today. Just Rava started to say, well, it all depends. Well, it actually really doesn't depend, but he says whether you darshan things one way or whether you darshan them another way, either which way, it's not going to work out to forbid his own grandmother. And the two approaches, what we call don mina mina, if we're going to learn from his grandmother-in-law to his wife's grandmother to his own grandmother, then we're going to learn everything. We're going to learn the punishment as well. We're going to learn completely everything from her grandmother, from his wife's grandmother. So if we say that, right, then we're going to learn just like the punishment there is burning. Also, the punishment by here would be burning. And then we went through and we said, there's no way we get to that. We had a few questions. I'm not going to review them. Now we're on the second part, which is what if you say, Dom minava oke ba'atra? This is a second approach, which is what if we say, learn from the grandmother-in-law to his own grandmother, but we're going to make it more similar to himself, meaning to his own arayot and not to his wife's arayot. So we're going to say the following, okay? And we're going to start 3 lines from the bottom of Ayin Hamubet. Laman damar dom minava oke ba'atra, mahi, and then we would say like this. Okay, first we're going to learn from her, just like her grandmother's forbidden to him, meaning the grandmother-in-law also, she'll be, right? His own grandmother would be forbidden to him. But but we're going to learn it more like it is his own case. His grandmother is going to be learned out from his own mother. His mother is gets stoned. He gets stoned for sleeping with his mother, so does she. Therefore, if he sleeps with his own grandmother, it'll be stoning. Even though we're learning it from her grandmother, we're going to learn the punishment from there. So, Lamanda Amar Sreifa Chamura Ikalamifrach. If you say that Sreifa is more stringent, then here is the slew of the questions you're going to have, the difficulties. In other words, why you'll never get to the fact that the grandmother is forbidden. Because if Sreifa is more severe, then we're going to say like this. Malihi Shekeni Ma B'Sreifa. Right, so now, her mother is forbidden by Sreifa, which is more severe right now because we're going with Sreifa's more severe, burning. So if he sleeps with his wife's mother, his mother-in-law, it's going to be burning. Tomar behu sheimo beskila. But his own mother only gets stoned, meaning it's less severe. So if the more severe punishment is for the mother-in-law, then if the grandmother-in-law is forbidden, it doesn't necessarily mean that his own grandmother will be forbidden because his own mother gets a lighter punishment, and therefore maybe we won't even learn that his grandmother's forbidden at all. Ve'od, second question, hu kihi, mahi lo chilakta ben bita le'em ima, afu lo tachlok bo ben bito le'em imo. The mother's daughter, the wife's daughter, what does he get if he sleeps with his wife's daughter? Burning. What does he get if he sleeps with the grandmother-in-law? Also burning, meaning all the wife's relatives he gets burned for sleeping with them. So then you would say, Afu lo tachlok bo ben bito li'emimo. Then for him, it shouldn't be a difference if he sleeps with his mother or his grandmother. Now, if he sleeps with his mother, what's the punishment? His daughter, the punishment is streifa. So just like with his wife's relatives, the daughter will be the same as the grandmother's punishment. Also on his side, the daughter should be the same as the grandmother's punishment, and they're not, because right now we're saying stoning. So that doesn't match up at all. And we're going to finish with Ulamanda Amar Skila Chamuranu. If you say Skila is more severe, then you don't really have the first question. It's not going to be an issue. But mehai kusha lo nidona, you would never get to the fact that the grandmother, his own grandmother, is forbidden because of this second argument. Because in the second argument, they don't really line up. Okay? Now we're going to our presentation. I'm going to open it up and share my screen if you're watching on video. And if not, I recommend you open it. It will be very helpful for this next section. Now, the next section starts out with the second law of Abaye on the previous page. Okay, sorry, the second part of the braita, the way Abaye explained it, which is, we had this, 1 second, Imahi kalato asua. Just give me a second. Right. Now, we had this issue of the zcharim are like the nikevot, if you remember. And then we said, we're going to compare his, if you remember, Abaye said, to find it, it's right. Minayin, it's at the very top of Ayin Hamud Bet. Minayin la'asot she'el haba mimenu kishe'el haba mimena. Right? How do we know that the relatives that come from her are or that come from him are going to have the same ruling as the relatives that come from her? Which is, remember, his daughter. That's what we just said a minute ago. His daughter will get stoned. Okay, we really don't need the presentation yet. You don't have to look at. I'll actually put it right like this. His daughter gets stoned. How do we know that? Because his wife's daughter gets stoned. And we're going to compare that, and we learn that from the Zima. Okay? Remember, it said Zima and that pasuk, it said Zima and that pasuk. We'll get back to that later. But now we're going to say, if he has relations with his daughter, he's going to get the same punishment as if he has relations with her daughter. Then let's ask another question, which is, Ima kalato asura, well, just like his own daughter-in-law, okay, the woman in green here, is forbidden to him, his daughter-in-law, af he kalata asura. Well, maybe his wife's daughter-in-law, again, we're talking about they have different children from different marriages. So his wife's daughter-in-law should be forbidden to the husband also. Okay? Now, we obviously have to be talking about a situation where his daughter-in-law or her daughter-in-law is no longer married to her son. Okay, they're divorced or he died or something like that. So we want to know, since his daughter-in-law is forbidden, can we learn from there to the daughter-in-law? So again, we're going to say no. And Abaye is going to have a very simple answer, and Rava is going to have a much more complicated answer. Abaye says, Amar Abaye, Amar Kra, Eshet binchahi. When the daughter-in-law, the kalata, is forbidden, it says specifically because she is Eshet bincha. She is the wife of your son, and that's what makes her forbidden. Being the wife, the wife of his wife's son, that's not the same kind of thing. So mishum eshet bincha tamachayvo v'iyah tamachayvo mishum eshet binah. So therefore, she's only forbidden because she's his son's wife, and therefore the wife's daughter-in-law would not be forbidden. That's Abaye. But Rava says, no. Rava says like this. Bein lamanda amar dom mina umina, bein lamar dom mina v'okei v'atra. We already know where this is going. We're going to go through both parts. Whether you say we're going to learn, if we learn her daughter-in-law from his daughter-in-law, and then we're going to learn not only is she forbidden, but also the punishment from there, or we're going to learn her daughter-in-law is forbidden, but we're actually going to learn her punishment for the wife's relatives, which we already remember. Most of the wife's relatives, the mother-in-law, the grandmother-in-law, the daughter, all get burned. So then her punishment will be burning. So those are going to be the two tracks we're going to take. Either which way, lo atya. Either which way, we're not going to be able to learn it. Okay? So the first part, this is Rava's answer, part 1. Lamanda amar dom mina mina, if you say we're going to learn it completely from the daughter-in-law. Okay, so now we're going to take this farther. We're going to say, okay, his daughter-in-law forbidden, right, stoning, and therefore her daughter-in-law should be forbidden to him by stoning. So mahu kalato asura, afinami kalata asura. So first we're going to learn just the forbidden. Then we're going to learn umina, and from that completely, mahi beskila, afhinami beskila. Mahu beskila, just like his daughter-in-law is beskila, stoned. Also, her daughter-in-law would be stoned. So now we're going to see why this doesn't work. Okay, next page. Lemanda amar skila chamura ikalamifrach. So the first reason why her daughter-in-law is not going to be forbidden is because of this. If you say stoning is more severe, then you can basically question it like this. Ma lehu shekain imo beskila. Now his mother, we're going to compare basically his side to her side. So his side, his mother gets stoned. Tomar bihi she'ima b'sreifa. But his mother-in-law, if he has relations with his mother-in-law, it's only burning, which is less severe. So now we're going to say, therefore, again, what will we say? We're not going to learn that if his daughter-in-law is forbidden, we're going to forbid her daughter-in-law, because look at his mother and his mother-in-law. His mother has a much stricter law than the mother-in-law, which means that her side is already less strict, which means who knows whether the daughter-in-law is forbidden or not, and there's no reason to forbid the daughter-in-law. Now, obviously, this is only a question if you think stoning is more severe. If burning is more severe, then it would actually make sense. But anyway, if burning is more severe, we're going to have a different question. Ve'od, we're going to actually have three issues here. The second is going to be like this. Ve'od, bita b'sreifa, ve'kalata b'skila. Question number 2 is, the wife's daughter gets burned. And now if we say, if the husband sleeps with the wife's daughter, the punishment is burning. If the husband sleeps with the wife's daughter, punishment is burning. If the husband sleeps with the wife's daughter-in-law, it's stoning. Now, if stoning is more severe, that would make no sense. Obviously, the daughter of the wife is closer to the wife than the daughter-in-law. So it's intuitively totally it doesn't make any sense. So that's question number 2. But question number 2, we're actually going to answer for. To which the Gemara says, now the premise of, okay, so this would basically say, here, I'm going to just show you. This would basically say the daughter-in-law must be permitted, because you can't learn this one from the other. Okay, so we had here, could she be, right? Could it possibly be? No, it can't possibly be, and therefore she's permitted. Now we're going to say, wait a minute, that's not a good question, because hu ba'atzmo yochiach, debito b'sreifa v'kalato b'skila. Just because someone's a blood relative doesn't actually mean that the punishment is going to be more severe, because look at the case of his daughter-in-law gets stoned, his own daughter-in-law. And his own daughter, we learned, gets burned, right? Or if he sleeps with the daughter, he gets burned. So if he has relations with his own daughter, he gets burned. But with his daughter-in-law, who's not a blood relative, he gets stoned, which means that it's actually could be more severe for the daughter-in-law, in which case you could actually say that the wife's daughter, he would get burned, but if he had relations with the daughter-in-law, she could get stoned. So that's actually not a question. Because again, we're trying to get from all these answers to basically say this isn't the case, okay? In other words, we don't say, just like in the last sugya, his grandmother is not forbidden to him, also his wife's daughter-in-law is not forbidden. Now we have question number 3. According to Rava's answer part 1, we're still with don mina mina. This is assuming we would learn her daughter-in-law from his daughter-in-law, both forbidden and stoning. Ella mahu, and this is exactly what we did in the previous sugya. Lo chilakta bein imo lekalato. Now, the punishment for both his mother and for his daughter-in-law is stoning. So now we want to do the exact parallel thing, and that's why I put a dividing line here on the other side. We want to say whatever is true for his mother-in-law should be the same punishment the daughter-in-law gets. So just like lo chilakta bein imo lekalato, there was no distinction in terms of the punishment. It was the same if the man sleeps with his mother or his daughter-in-law. If he, also on the wife's side, if he has relations with someone on his wife's side, lo tachlok ba bein ima lekalata. It should be the same. And what does it say here, according to what we've established? His mother-in-law, if he has relations with, he gets burning. If he sleeps with the daughter-in-law right now, it's stoning. So that doesn't make sense that his mom and his daughter-in-law get the same punishment for, but his mother-in-law and his daughter and his wife's daughter-in-law, he wouldn't get the same punishment. So that's question number 3. And if you paid attention, Leman damar streifa chamura behai kusha lo nidoni. If you hold that streifa is chamur, okay, so this basically, just to show you, this would show she's definitely permitted, the daughter-in-law. And now going to the one who says streifa is chamura, this is the only question that wasn't based on the fact that stoning is more severe than burning. The first 2 questions all were based on stoning being more severe than burning. This one doesn't make a difference because it's both his relatives get stoned and her relatives, one gets burned, one gets stoned, and that doesn't make any sense. So this question would also work according to the one who says streifa chamura, and this is why we can't learn it. That's all in the first track of Rava's answer, which was Don Mina Umina. Now we're going to move to Lemanda Amar Don Mina Voke Ba'atra. Learn from this and establish it like it is in that place. And that's why there's two arrows here, as you're going to see, which means what? Mahu kalato asura, just like his own daughter-in-law is forbidden. Also, afi kalata asura. That's the first Don Mina. Learn her daughter-in-law from his daughter-in-law. The okay ba'atra, but we're going to learn it from her relatives and from where? Her mother-in-law. So okay ba'atra hatem hu debeskila, right? On the husband's side, his daughter-in-law gets stoned. Aval hacha, but since the wife's relatives get shreifa, kidesh kachan bi'ima, like we see with her mother, right? The mother-in-law. Therefore, we're going to say the daughter-in-law will get burning. And now we're going to try to suggest the daughter-in-law will be forbidden and her punishment will be burning and not stoning. So now we're going to have our slew of questions again, or reasons why this wouldn't work. The first one is this. Again, Lamanda Amar Skila Chamura Ikalamifrach. If stoning is more severe, you can question like this. Malahu Shakeni Mo Beskila Tomar Bihishi Ma Besreifa. Now, which is more severe, his mom or his mother-in-law? His mother, because she gets stoned. So if his mother is more severe, then, and the daughter-in-law, his own daughter-in-law is forbidden, you could say his own daughter-in-law is forbidden because the ruling for his mother is so severe, we're going to therefore be machmir on him and also forbid the daughter-in-law. But in the case where his mother-in-law only is burning, which is less severe, you wouldn't necessarily learn from there to the daughter-in-law, okay? And therefore, maybe she's actually permitted, okay? Now, Od, the second question is, Mahu chilakta bein bito lekalato, af hitachlok ba bein bita lekalata. Now, instead of saying they're the same, we're now going to pick two people who have different punishments. We're going to say, look, his daughter-in-law and his own daughter have different punishments. Now, this is going to make no difference whether stoning is more severe or not. His own daughter-in-law gets stoned, and with his own daughter, it's burning. So wouldn't you think that with her daughter-in-law would also be a differentiation between if he sleeps with the wife's daughter, if he sleeps with her daughter-in-law, and according to the theory we're saying right now, dominava okay ba'atra, it would be burning and burning. So because of that, we're going to reject it and say no, she's actually permitted. And from there, we're going to say the same thing as before, which is ulamanda amar nami streifa chamura. This last issue would be whether you say streifa is chamura or not, right? Before we had skila chamura, there was a question. This question is going to be also if you say streifa is chamura, mehai kushaloni donin, you will not be able to learn that the daughter-in-law is forbidden. And that's why then we conclude that the wife's daughter-in-law is actually permitted, okay? Or at least not forbidden that you're going to get the punishment of death. Wouldn't go recommending it, but it's not forbidden. Okay, now we get to a new question. Okay, for this, the charts are a little bit less necessary, but once I had charts, I figured, okay, let's just use them. Bitot manu satominayin. Now we get to a case, it's a little bit unpleasant. We have a daughter of the father when the father raped a woman. Okay, now it doesn't actually have to be rape. The Gemara brings the case of rape. It could also be out of wedlock. In other words, he's not married to the woman. So what's our source for this? And for this, we're going to have three answers. Okay, the first two are somewhat similar. Okay, we're going to see right now. The first answer is Abaye. So they're going to say, Amar Abaye, kal v'chomer. Okay, there's a kal v'chomer here. Al bat bito, I see it says here, doesn't Abaye say Hamar Abaye? There's a bit of a girsa issue here. Okay, what exactly? But we're going to go with Amar Abaye, even though this presentation says Hamar, fix it after class. But Amar Abaye, Abaye says kal v'chomer. It's a kal v'chomer like this. Now, before we even read Abaye, we need to get some background. You might remember Abaye said, Hachi kamar, this was on yesterday's daf, minayin lasot she'er haba mimenu she'er haba mimena. This is what I reminded you of in the beginning of class. Ne'amar kan zima v'ne'amar lahalan zima. Right? If you remember, we have these psukim. We started with the punishment of burning for the mother-in-law, isha she'ikach disha ve'etima, a woman and her mother. The mother-in-law, right? Zima hi ba'esh yisrofu oto ve'etem v'lo tia zima b'tochem. Okay, zima appears twice in the pasuk there. Only made one of them red, but it appears twice. Then we have a warning for the granddaughter. Okay, the warnings are all in Parak Yud Chet. So the warning for his granddaughter is Ervat bat bincha u bat bitcha lo tegaler vatan. Okay, the granddaughter, his granddaughter, you can, because it's ki ervatcha hena. There's the word hena. And for his wife's daughter and granddaughter, it says Ervat isha u bita lo tegaler. et bat bina ve'et bat bita lo tikach legalot ervata, sheira hena zimahi. Okay, so here we have the woman and her daughter. So we have the wife's daughter, and then we have Pasuk Yuchet, which is his granddaughter. Now, what's missing? His daughter. Now, that Pasuk about the granddaughter seems to be talking about daughter out of marriage, because daughter of the wife would be, right, in Pasuk Yud Zayin. We've already gone through this. So now we had the Gzera Shava of Zima Zima, and really Hena Hena, right? Hena got us from Pasuk Yud to Pasuk Yud Zayin. Then Zima got us from Yud Zayin to chapter 20 with the punishment. And from there we learn that Bitome Anusato, right? We learned really there that the granddaughter from out of wedlock, okay, we'll just call it out of wedlock to keep it simple. The granddaughter out of wedlock will get streifa. So now we want to know, how do we know his own daughter gets streifa? So Abaye says very obviously, kavachomer, al bat bito anush, al bat bito lo koshaken, right? If on your granddaughter you're going to get punished by streifa, by burning, of course on your daughter you will, right? That how is the granddaughter related to you if not through your daughter? To which the Gemara questions, we don't learn punishments from Kavachomers, and that's what we're looking for. To which they answer, this isn't a Kalvachomer, really a Kalvachomer. This is just obvious, right? If you say the grandmother, the granddaughter, it obviously includes the daughter also, even though it didn't say it. Maybe there was sort of no point, and therefore that's answer number one. Comes Rava and gives answer number two. Amali Rav Yitzchak Bar Avdimi, at Yehena Hena, at Zima Zima. He basically says we're going to learn it from the Gzera Shava, Hena, and he's basically going to say, now, how exactly he's different than Abaye is a bit of a question, okay? Right, they're basically just saying, just like what they're going to explain is that in Pasuk Yud Zayin, he's going to explain it a little bit differently. In Pasuk Yud Zayin, in chapter 18, it says, Hervat isha bita lo tegale, and then it bat bina ve'et bat bita. And there it equates the daughter and the granddaughter. And in that pasuk it says Hena, and in the pasuk before pasuk Yud it also says Hena, and that's the pasuk where it just mentions the granddaughter. So we're going to say Hena comes to teach you, just like the daughter is mentioned with the granddaughter in pasuk Yud Zayin. It's as if the daughter is mentioned in pasuk Yud as well. And then we're going to have Zima Zima, which is going to bring all of them back to the punishment for the granddaughter, right, for the mother-in-law, and we're going to say from there it's going to be the same, right, for all those, they're all going to get straight. So that's answer number two. Answer number three is the father of Rabbi Avin. Tana Avuad Rabbi Avin, he brings a braita. Lefisha lo lamandu lebitome anusato. He says, look, there really is no pasuk. He doesn't agree with all the other pasukim. Okay, he says, no, it's not the case. We need a different pasuk. And he says, Hutzracha katuv lomar ubat ish kohen. Okay, here's the pasuk. Ubat ish kohen. Kitechel is note. Actually, it's a very strange pasuk because it's talking about the bat kohen. But again, we want to get to Sreifa, so it's perfect because we want to know, how do we know that his daughter, out of wedlock, he will get punished by burning. So, bat ish kohen, kitechel is note, et avia hi mechalelet. So, the daughter of a kohen, if she starts to do znut, her father, she is desecrating. By Eish Chisarev, she will be destroyed by fire. So now, how do we darshan it from here? So Rashi says, well, first of all, bat ish is a little unnecessary. You could just say bat. So why is it the bat of a man? Because it's a man who doesn't have a wife. And then we say, ki techel is no. Now there's a comma there, right? And then it says, et aviyahi mechalele. Her father, she's desecrating because she had relations with another man. But if you read it in a drasha way, meaning we can avoid the punctuation, sort of. Kitechel is note et avia, if she starts to have relations with her father. And there you have it. Okay? That's the bat ish kohen, where she's the daughter of a man who doesn't have a wife, and she's zoneh with avia, and then the punishment is burning. And then the punishment is going to be actually burning for both. Okay, there ends our presentation. Now we're going to just stick with the Gemara. We don't need the presentation as much, which I guess is a good sign. It means the daf is a little less complicated. So now they're going to say, Ima bakoin he b'sreifa ve'ein bo ala b'sreifa. Wait a minute, but that whole pasuk is all talking about the bakoin. Only she gets burnt. Remember, the man who has relations with her actually gets the regular punishment of chenek. So are you going to say af bitomenu satoi b'sreifa ve'ein bo ala b'sreifa? So if you're learning it from that pasuk, you would say then the father doesn't get burnt, only she gets burnt. Amar Abaye, no. Abaye says no, you're not going to say that because Amar et avia hi mechalel. Now, why does only she get burned? Because she desecrates her father's name. Now that's Misha Mechalelet et Avia. That's because she desecrated her father's name. But yet, but in this case, the father desecrated her by having relations with his own daughter. Of course, he's going to get streifa. Rava gives a different answer. Rava Amar, okay, if we haven't seen enough disagreements, Rava and Abaye here today. Okay, let's take a regular case. A man has relations with a bat kohen. She's married, and basically, if it was a regular law, what would happen? She wasn't a bat kohen, he'd get chenek. And she would, but because she's a bat kohen, she gets straight, but he stays with the original law. That means ukimta adina de ba Israel. He stays with the regular din of a bat Israel because it wasn't so much his fault that she happened to be a bat kohen. It's her fault for being zoneh, ruining her father's name. Adina de ma muchmitle, adina de pnuya muchmitle. But if a man sleeps with his own daughter, and let's say, right, this is going to be a problem even if she's unmarried. Now, what's the punishment for a man who sleeps with an unmarried woman? There is no punishment. So therefore, if he sleeps with his daughter and we say we're not going to get straight for what punishment are we going to give him, there is no punishment to give him because there's no punishment for an unmarried woman. Okay. That was the first part of the sugya. Where do we get the punishment for bito me'anu sato? Now we're going to ask, as harana bito me'anu sato minai, where are we going to get the warning? Now, Rava and Abaye already, go but look back at the presentation, gave us psukim for that. Remember? It was all, they used the psukim from the warning and got through the Gzeira Sheva to the punishment. So obviously for them, Bishlam ala Abaye v'Rava, mehecha denafkalu onesh, mehatam nafkalei asara. However they learned from those psukim, that's what they're going to get also for the warning. Ela l'detani avoid Rabbi Avin mai, but where's the warning according to Rabbi Avin, Rabbi Avin's father? Amar Rabbi Ila, Amar Kras, Rabbi Ila says, the pasuk says, al techalel et bitcha lahaznota. Okay, here's another pasuk. Okay, there's a pasuk in chapter 19. It's right in between that 18 and 20 chapter of the Arayot. Don't desecrate your daughter to have her be a prostitute. So from there, it means don't sleep with your daughter, even if it's not your wife's daughter. Okay, where that we have a pasuk for. So Malkav Rabbi Yaakov, Achua de Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov. He says, what are you talking about? Hi, okay, this whole next section is really fascinating. Okay, if you might have had struggles with all these psukim and all these this and back and forth, now we're going to get to some real interesting things that the Gemara addresses that you might be surprised they address. You might not. It's appropriate they address these things, which is it comes to teach you something else. So first of all, the Midrash Halacha starts questioning. You might have thought, maybe it means that the father can't start marrying his daughter off if she's a bat Kohen to a Levi or Yisrael. Okay, maybe that would be a desecration because she's leaving the Kohen family. Talmud Lomar, but it says lahaznutano. That's not znut. That's maybe lechalel tzat. She lowers down in her sanctity, but it's not znut. Thank God, because I did that. But bechilul shebiznut katum medaber. They're obviously talking about something having to do with prostitution and inappropriate relations. So therefore, what is it? B'moser et bito shelo l'shem ishut. This is talking about someone who gives off his daughter to someone not for marriage purposes. Okay, this is like, what we call in Hebrew, I can't think of the word in English, sachar b'nashim, right? Like using your daughter to sell her off to someone or give her off to a man. Maybe you'll get, the father will get something benefit out of it. Okay, using his daughter, that you can't do. So now they say, so how do you learn the azhara for bitomeanu sato and the arayot there? Well, in ken lemakra al tachel. Tachel would already be desecrate. And the fact that it says my al techalel, we can actually learn both. Shma min atarte. So now we have to go back to Abaye and Rava. They didn't learn the azhara from you. They learned it from the other psukim. So what two things do they get from this pasuk? Hi al techalel bitchalas notam my avdele. Amar Ravimani. It's even more interesting. Zem masiyah bitol zaken. If he marries off his daughter to an old man, that's not a good idea. Why is it not a good idea? They assume here that the old man is not going to have sexual desire anymore. And the woman will not have her sexual desire satisfied by her husband. And that will lead her to end up going to sleep with other men. So it's irresponsible of a father to do that. And that's called, it means the father basically is causing the daughter to end up with prostitution. Kiditan, as it says in a braita, al techalelet bitcha laznota. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, zeh masiyah bitol zaken. And this is basically the second thing that Abaye and Rava would learn from this pasuk because they don't have the second thing of the warning for the bitomeanu sato. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Zeh mashhed bito bogeret. Here's another one. And both of these could be potentials for what Rava and Abaye are learning from this pasuk, which is this is someone who lets his daughter get old and doesn't sell her off to be married, or not even really, I shouldn't say sell her off. I said that wrong. We were talking about selling the women. That's why it was in my mind. This is basically he would marry her off generally. And if he leaves her till she's older and doesn't marry her off early, that's a problem. Now you might say, what are we talking about? You're going to see this doesn't mean, okay, you let your daughter get married later. What this means is he holds her back from getting married. He prevents her. Why would he do that? Because he wants her serving him at home. Okay, not sexually serving him, just he wants help in the house. He doesn't want to lose his daughter. Okay, and we're going to see this inside in another minute. Amar Rav Kana Mishum Rabbi Akiva. Ein lecha anisha b'Yisrael. You don't have a poor person in Israel. Ella rasha arum. Okay, an evil person who's sly and deceptive. V'hamashhet bito bogeret. And someone who leaves his daughter, makes her get old, and doesn't marry her off because he wants her in the house with him. So they don't really understand what this has to do with being poor and what one has to do with the other. And they say, they say, I think we're missing something here. A rasha arum is exactly defined as someone who does this. It's evil to basically hold your daughter back from getting married so that you can have a woman to serve you in the house and take care of your needs. That's just not appropriate, right? That's why I think it's interesting. The Gemara is addressing these very real issues. So Amar Abaye, so what it really means is, so don't read it the way it said it. Ezehu ani rasha arum, zeh masheh bito bogeret. What kind of poor person is because they're poor, they become very deceptive. What's a poor, deceptive person? Again, because they're poor, they don't want to afford to get a maidservant, so they leave their daughter in the house and they don't let her get married. And that is a rasha arum. That's a really terrible person, and that's who masheh bito bogeret. And Amar Rav Kana Mishum Rabbi Akiva. Here's another line they say, super interesting. You should be very wary of people who give you advice because it's in their own best interest. So you have to really, what it's saying, and it seems like this isn't just talking about a father and daughter, although for sure a father and daughter should be aware and try to be conscious of her father and the advice he's giving and see, is he giving it to her for her own sake or for his own personal benefit? And likewise, this is true for anybody who gets advice. You should make sure the person isn't giving you advice. They have some ulterior motive where it's actually self-serving for them. Amar, right? These are great sugyot because they're really getting at the Gemara. Again, this is not halacha. This is just how to be human and how to interact and how to be cautious of, things that you could, you might not be aware of, and you should be sensitive to all sorts of things that might go on and be aware of people who might be taking advantage of you. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Hamasi et bito lezaken, someone who marries off his daughter to an older man, or Hamasi isha lebno katan, where the son is so young that he's also not having sexual relations yet and not interested. Both of these are going to lead the daughter astray because, again, she's not going to have her desires satisfied with her husband. She's going to look elsewhere for that. And hamachzir, we haven't finished the sentence yet. V'hamachzir aveda legoy. This is an interesting one. Someone who returns a lost item to a Gentile. Okay, this is looked at as a bad thing. We'll get back to that in a minute. Alava katuv omer. Now we're going to see what they say about all these three things. These are all similar in some way. Leman sfot harava et hatzmeah. Lo yoveh Hashem sloch lo. So the pasuk talks about if, okay, we're going to have to try to explain. It's very hard pasuk to translate literally, but leman sfot harava et hatzmeah. Rava is someone who's satiated with someone who's thirsty. Okay, let's take the first two examples. We have someone who's satiated, who doesn't have a sexual desire, the old man or the young child, and we have someone who's thirsty. That's the woman. And it doesn't go together. Don't put these two together. That's the sfot. Put them together. Don't do that. And if you do, lo yavasham sloch, God will not forgive you. Okay, this is a bad thing to do. Why machzira vedalagoy? So very interesting. The Meiri, first of all, the Meiri in general, right? He differentiates between Gentiles. There's Gentiles who are evil people and immersed in terrible things all the time. And those people, okay, the Meiri doesn't say this, but other commentaries say this, they steal your money, and therefore they already have a lot. And you don't have to return them lost items because anyway, they've probably stolen things from you. Okay, the Meiri doesn't view it as exactly they've stolen, but that you don't need to. Okay, he actually has this interesting theory about returning lost items that you don't really have to ever return a lost item because most people who lose items don't ever expect to get it back. And it's a chesed. You don't have to do a chesed for Gentiles. They don't, right? We're not required to. But again, the Meiri says Gentiles are, evil people, Gentiles, not all Gentiles. And he clearly differentiated. He said, the Gentiles we associate with are not this way, and they're not evil people, right? But the ones the Gemara was dealing with were, and again, it could be they've stolen your money anyway, so that's why you don't have to return lost items. It's just basically you don't need to give them; they don't need your money. They don't need their lost items back. Okay, Meitive. Now we have a difficulty with this issue of marrying off your daughter to, or marrying off a woman to your young child. Okay, now we said marrying off a woman to, right? I didn't say it right before. I was just saying you married your daughter off to an old man or you married her off to a young man, but really, I realize now it's you married off your daughter to an older person, and you married a woman off to your young son. Okay, so you're the one who has a son that's young. Anyway, it doesn't really make a difference. It's both the same because someone's marrying off this way. Mating. Now we have a difficulty. How have it is gufo. Now we're going to have, instead of terrible people, we're going to have great people. Someone who respects, who loves his wife like himself. Hamechabda yoter migufo, and he respects her even more than he respects himself. V'hamadrich banav u'bnotav b'derech yeshara, and he puts his children on the right path. V'hamesian samuch liperkah, and he marries them off before they get of age. This sounds like, right, it's a good thing. This is, you will have peace in your household. And these are great things to do for your household. It makes for a good marriage. It makes for a good marriage for your children. It's excellent. So how do we explain this? We just said, don't marry off your son, when he's still a minor. To which they answer, oh, this is samuch liperkan shani. This is when they're close to becoming of age. That's a different story. They're already, on their way. They're much closer. When we said Beno Katan, we meant really young. Tanu Rabbanit wrote she'll have to wait a number of years. Here she'll only have to wait maybe a year. That she can handle. Tanu Rabbanit, another braita. Ha'ohevet shchinav. Okay, now we're getting to good things. Someone who loves their neighbors. Ha'mekarevet krovav. He brings his relatives close to him. Ha'noseet bat achoto. You might remember this from Gitin. We kept having a person who will try to protect. We were worried someone might protect his niece that he's married to. Okay, this is a good thing to marry. We kept wondering, why they keep talking about someone who's married to the niece. I mean, we talked about it. It was common in those days, and it's actually looked at as a good thing. Okay, I was thinking it's like a family business. Like you want to have family doing your. Okay, no, not everybody likes family businesses. I have a whole history in my house, my family with family businesses. I know there's pros and cons to it, but there's one huge advantage about family businesses. You know that they'll, in the end, they have, right, the best interest of the business in mind because it's their own business, right? You trust them. It's very easy to trust them. They probably, should say, probably won't steal from you or all that. Sometimes that happens too. But now we're saying, if you marry your niece, right, it's a good thing because you're keeping it within the family and you know that the husband will take care of her well because he's related to her. Right, this is, by the way, obviously in a rayot that's not forbidden, right? Not a rayot, it's a relation that's not forbidden. You lend money to a poor person when they really need it. This is a person that the pasuk will be fulfilled that says, you will cry and God will answer you. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're back to our topic of otove et hen. This we actually learned previously, and now we're seeing it inside. Otove et hen, otove et echat mehen. Okay, remember this is the burning pasuk, the pasuk about the one we saw earlier today about the isha sheyikach isha ve'et ima, sleep with a man. A woman and her mother. Zimai ba'esh yisrafu otove et hen. We said there was a big problem with that pasuk. He and them, both of them don't get killed because one is his wife. It's only the mother-in-law that's going to get killed because, right, the wife was a little fair and square, legit married. So Rabbi Yishmael says, yeah, it's only one of them. That's what Rabbi Yishmael means. That's the way he understands it. Rabbi Akiva Omer Tovet Shtehen, he means two of them. What is two of them? Remember, we said it's the mother-in-law and the grandmother-in-law. Remember, he understood the grandmother-in-law is actually in the pasuk, whereas Rabbi Yishmael says, oh, the grandmother-in-law is learned out from a drasha. Remember, when it comes to her and her granddaughter are going to be forbidden, right? And then also her and her mother and grandmother-in-law will be, right? Her grandmother will be forbidden. So, now what's the difference between them, right? In the end, they both say the grandmother-in-law is forbidden to the husband. But Amar Abaye, mashmu dorshini kabenai. It's just the way they darshan the pasuk. Rabbi Shmuel savar tovet hen or tovet achat mehen. Shkem b'lashon yivani korin lechat hena. Right, in Greek, achat is hena. So when it says het hen, it means in the Greek one. Em chamoto midrasha atya. And the way you learn the grandmother-in-law, is from a drasha. Rabbi Akiva savar tovet hen or tovet shtehen. Right, it's both of them. Ve'em chamoto hachaktiva. And the grandmother-in-law is actually in this pasuk explicitly. That was Abaye. Rava has a different explanation of their machloket, if you remember. Rava says, Chamotola achar mita ikabenayu. The mother-in-law, after the wife dies, is a machloket, whether it's forbidden still. Rabbi Shmuel savar chamotola achar mita b'sreifa. Rabbi Akiva savar isur ba'alma. So Rabbi Shmuel says, right, what it's saying, otov et achat mehem, means even if only one of them is still in existence, meaning the wife is dead already, still you're going to get sreifa. And Rabbi Akiva says, shtehen means they both have to be alive in order for it to be sreifa. If not, it's just a lav. It's like you shouldn't do it, but you're not going to get punished by the death penalty. And with that, we finish the nisrafim, and we're moving on to the neharagim. Ve'elu hen ha-neharagim, harotzeach, v'anshei ir hanidachat, a murderer, and the people in the ir hanidachat. That's all that gets hereg, which is, remember, the sword decapitation. So a murderer and the people in the city where they all worship idols. Rotzach shikat re'eyu. Now we're going to see what kind of ways that you murder someone that you're going to be liable. Be'even o bebarzel. Okay, these are in the psukim when it talks about going to the refuge city, and it differentiates someone who killed on purpose and someone who killed unintentionally. It talks about killing with a stone or with an iron implement. Another case, if someone's in the water and you stop them from getting out of the water, you hold them underwater till they drown, or they're in a place where there's a fire and you shut that door and make sure they can't get out, you're chayav. Dachafo, you might remember we learned this sugya way back in Bava Kama, very interesting sugya. Dachafo l'toch hamayim or l'toch ha'ol, if you push them into the water or into a fiery furnace, but yachol alot misham, but they could get out of there on their own and they don't, vamet, and they die, patur, you don't get the death penalty because you didn't really cause their death. They could have stopped themselves from dying. Shisabo et hakelef, shisabo et hanachash, if you get a dog or a snake to go attack them, patur, you're exempt. But ishichbo et hanachash, if you held the snake there so that the snake bit the person, then Rabbi Yehuda mechayev chachamim potrim. So there's machlokes to Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis whether you're obligated or not. We'll get to that later in the Gemara, not today. Amar Shmuel, lo ne'emra yad bebarzel. Okay, now in the psukim it talks about obe vayikra, where you hit with anger, or and then they talk about be'evan yad. The word yad appears in a bunch of contexts there. Yad seems to mean the size of a hand. Okay, meaning it has to have a certain size to it. What exactly the size, we're not going to talk about right now, but it has a minimum size. Because a rock that's really small won't kill someone. But by barzel, it doesn't say yad. So why not? Shabarzel memit bechoshu. That's because barzel can kill. It doesn't. If you have a metal implement, like an iron implement, it can kill any size. Tanya Namihachin, there's a braita that says the same thing. Rebbe Omer, Galoi v'yador lefnei misha amar vayal olam, shabarzel memit bechoshu. God knew that barzel can kill in any size. Lefichach lo nitna Torah bo shiur, and that's why the Torah didn't give it any requisite amount. But the Gemara says, Hani mile b'debarze mivras. That's only if you stab someone with an iron implement. If you're going to throw an iron implement at someone or smack them on the back, then it needs to be a certain size. If it's really small, it's not going to do anything. But if you're going to stab them with it, any size can obviously kill. The kavash alav l'toch hamayim. Okay, now notice there's a different word used here. One is you make them struggle under the water, you don't let them out. And the other is you push them into the water. So why do you use different words here? Well, it's because Reisha Ributa Kamashmala V'Sefer Ributa Kamashmala. Each wanted to include something additional, point something out special, which means Reisha Ributa Kamashmala, which is Afagav Delav Iuda Chafo. Even if you didn't push the person in the water, all you did, the person jumped in the water on their own, and then you prevented them from getting out. You're still obligated, even though you actually didn't even do an action. All you did was not allow them to get out. You're liable for murder. Obviously, if you push them also, but this is telling you even if you didn't push them. Since you basically prevented them from getting out, and they died, it's your responsibility. And Seifa ributa kamash malan afagav didachafo keban diachol elam v'shavamei patur. And the Seifa also teaches you something, which is, since you could get out and you don't, in other words, they're pushing, even though you push the person into the water. And in the end, they died from it. But since they could have gotten out on their own, obviously it means they could swim, right? If they couldn't swim, maybe you're responsible. That's a good question, right? What does it mean that they could get out? So they have to be able to get out. What if you didn't know they couldn't swim? That's another question also. But we're not getting into that now. The point is, since the person could have gotten out and they didn't, you become exempt, even though you actually did an action to push them in. Okay. Kavash minalan, how do we know that if you keep someone underwater, you're going to be liable? Amar Shmuel, Amar Kra, O be'eva, because it says or be'eva, meaning out of hatred you did it, but it add the word or. What does or come to include? L'rabot the same. That's to include someone who basically got you stuck in a very small, got a person stuck in a small place and killed them. Here's a story. There was a person now who kept an animal outside in the sun and wouldn't let them out of the sun, forced them to stay there, and the animal died. Ravina mechayev, Rav Acha bar Rav patar. Okay, Ravina says you're obligated. Rav Acha bar Rav said you're exempt, and we'll wait for tomorrow to see why they each think you'd be exempt or obligated in that case. But that already is damages, because that's an animal, it's not the same, but we're going to deal with that tomorrow. So what did we do today? We finished up with, right, these drashot that we had in this braita that we started yesterday, and trying to figure out, could we come to forbid something else from there, right? And in the end, we said no, and not in any way, shape, or form, right? We went through a lot of possibilities. Then we did the warning. How do we know Bitome Anusato if he's not married to the woman, but he has a daughter with her? How do we know that she gets burned? How do we know where's the warning for that, right? We had three opinions, Rava, Abaye, and this braita that the father of Rabbi Avin brought. And then from there, we got sidetracked because Rabbi Avin's father had this, took from the Bat Kohen pasuk, and we got off on some stuff about that pasuk, and then we got into things about treating your daughter properly and not abusing her and not using her for the father's own needs, okay, and all sorts of interesting things. And then we had like people who were good and did things and people who did bad things. We put them in categories. And then we got back to Otove Attain, how we read that pasuk and the machloka Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and the two machloka Abaye and Rava, how to understand the machloka Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. And then we got to who are the Neragim, and from there we got into this very interesting issue of basically killing someone by, preventing them from getting out. And anyway, and we talked a little bit about the barzel and the requisite amount for an implement, in which case do you need a requisite amount, when do you not? And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.